My name is Beatrice. I am 65 years old, and I spent 40 of those long, exhausting years working the night shift as a pediatric nurse just to give my only child the world. I sacrificed my whole life for my son, only to watch him stand silently on our front porch as his wife threw my bags onto the street. They stood there and smugly locked the deadbolt, completely convinced they had finally claimed my beautiful home and my life savings for themselves. They thought they had won. They thought they could discard me like an old broken piece of furniture. But what they did not know as they slammed that heavy oak door in my face was that my lawyer was already preparing the paperwork. When the truth about the final trust is revealed tomorrow morning, my son and his greedy wife are going to discover that they have played right into my hands and they are left with absolutely nothing. The crisp October wind whipped through Atlanta that afternoon, cutting straight through my thin blouse and chilling me to the bone. I stood frozen on the concrete driveway, my heart pounding violently in my chest. As Brittany, my daughter-in-law, marched out the front door carrying my heavy wool winter coat, she did not even look at me. With a nasty sneer on her face, she just tossed my coat right into the muddy flower bed I had planted with my own 2 hands. I gasped, but I looked right past her, desperately searching for Jamal, the boy I carried for 9 months. The boy whose expensive college tuition I paid in full with my blood and sweat was standing in the foyer with his hands casually in his pockets. I locked eyes with him, begging him silently to stop this madness, to be the man I raised him to be. But my son just looked away and turned his back. The heavy metallic click of the deadbolt echoing across the quiet neighborhood felt like a physical blow to my chest. The visceral pain of a mother's broken heart is something you cannot describe until you feel it yourself. The betrayal was so deep, so sudden, it literally took my breath away. I was left shivering on the curb of the beautiful home I built, realizing that the child I loved more than life itself had just chosen a cunning, manipulative woman over the mother who gave him everything. To understand how deep this betrayal cut you, have to understand exactly what it took to build the life we had. My late husband Richard and I did not come from money. Everything we possessed we built from the ground up with calloused hands and countless sleepless nights. For decades, we easily worked 60-hour weeks. I would pull grueling 12-hour overnight shifts at the children's hospital, coming home with aching feet and a tired back, only to tag in and help Richard. He ran a highly successful catering business, cooking up southern feasts for corporate events and lavish weddings all across Atlanta. We sacrificed our own comfort so our family would never know the sting of poverty. We saved every extra penny, invested wisely, and eventually bought our absolute dream home. It was a stunning $1.2 million solid brick estate nestled in one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in Georgia. It had a sweeping staircase, a massive chef's kitchen where Richard loved to experiment with new recipes, and a sprawling backyard lined with ancient oak trees. We did not just buy a house, we built generational wealth. We wanted to make absolutely sure that our family name stood for something that our bloodline would never have to struggle the way we did growing up. It was a place where our legacy was supposed to take root and flourish forever. Richard and I poured our blood, our sweat, and our tears into the foundation of that house, turning it into a fortress of love and security for our family. It was our proudest achievement. A physical monument to all those missed holidays, those exhausted mornings, and those quiet moments of sacrifice. We built a kingdom so our son could live like a prince, never realizing that one day that same prince would try to banish me from the castle I built for him. 10 years ago, my world stopped spinning when the good Lord called my sweet Richard home. A sudden heart attack took the love of my life away from me in the blink of an eye. The grief was so heavy, it felt like I was physically drowning. But I knew I had to keep swimming for the sake of our boy. Jamal was still in college at the time, navigating his own path into adulthood. Without his father there to guide him, I overcompensated. I poured every ounce of my love, my energy, and our hard-earned money directly into Jamal. I wanted to shield him from the pain of losing his dad, so I made sure he never had to worry about a single financial burden. I paid off all of his expensive university student loans in one lump sum so he could graduate completely debt-free. When he got his degree, I bought him a brand new luxury sedan as a graduation present so he could drive to his job interviews in style. A few years later, when he wanted to start his own consulting firm, I did not hesitate for a second. I handed him a massive check for the down payment to get his business off the ground. I gave him the world on a silver platter. But looking back now, I can see the terrible mistake I made. In my desperate attempt to be both mother and father, I loved him completely blind. I gave him everything he asked for without ever teaching him the true value of $1. I was so busy smoothing out the road in front of him that I completely ignored his growing sense of entitlement. I brushed off his demanding tone and his ungrateful attitude as just the stress of being a young entrepreneur. I made excuses for him because he was my only child, my flesh and blood, the last living piece of my beloved Richard. Then Jamal met Brittany. When they announced their engagement, I was overjoyed. I genuinely thought my son had found a partner to build his life with. I welcomed that young woman into my family with wide open arms and an open heart. Every single week I cooked huge Sunday dinners, making sure to include all of her favorite dishes. I bought her thoughtful gifts, took her to my favorite salons, and treated her with the exact same love and respect I would have given my own biological daughter. I wanted us to be a close-knit family. But it did not take long for the shiny veneer to wear off, revealing the cold, manipulative nature hiding just beneath the surface. Slowly but surely, Brittany began to show her true colours. She would walk through my gorgeous brick home and make passive-aggressive comments, complaining loudly that the decor was just too old and outdated for her modern tastes. Whenever I hosted my lifelong church friends for afternoon tea, she would roll her eyes, sneer at our conversations, and lock herself in the guest bedroom. Worse than the blatant disrespect was the poison she started dripping into my son's ear. I would walk past the kitchen and hear her whispering to Jamal, twisting my actions and claiming that I was being way too controlling over their lives. She convinced him that my financial help was actually just a manipulative way to keep him on a leash, making him feel like less of a man unless he broke free from my shadow. She was methodically isolating him carefully, driving a wedge between a grieving mother and her only son, quietly setting the stage for the ultimate betrayal that would tear our family apart. About a year into their marriage, Jamal called me in tears. His consulting business had hit a severe rough patch, and they were drowning in debt. My motherly instincts kicked in immediately, and without a second thought, I invited them to move into my home so they could save money and get back on their feet. I cleared out the 2 spacious guest bedrooms for them, eager to help my son rebuild. But the gratitude I expected was completely non-existent. The moment they dragged their boxes across my threshold, the disrespect escalated to levels I never thought possible in my own home. Brittany walked through my hallways like a conquering queen, her nose permanently wrinkled in disgust. By the second week, she marched into the kitchen while I was cooking and flatly demanded the master suite. She claimed she needed the expansive space and natural light for her morning yoga routines and meditation. When I politely reminded her that the master bedroom was where Richard and I had slept for 30 years and where his most precious belongings were still kept, she rolled her eyes and sighed loudly. I looked to Jamal for support, waiting for my son to defend my sacred space. Instead, he rubbed the back of his neck, looked at the floor and mumbled that I should just let her have it, because it was only temporary. The betrayal stung, but to keep the peace and support my son, I swallowed my pride. I spent an entire weekend boxing up my late husband's suits, his watches, and the photographs of our life together. I carried those heavy boxes down to the damp basement all by myself, my joints aching with every step. I moved my own clothes into the smaller guest room at the end of the hall, telling myself that a mother's sacrifice knows no bounds. I kept reminding myself that they were struggling financially, and as a mother, it was my duty to provide a safe harbour. I would sit on the edge of the small guest bed at night, looking at a single framed photograph of Richard, tears streaming down my face. I asked him to give me strength, hoping that once Jamal got his business back on track, they would move out and I could finally reclaim my sanctuary. But that temporary storm was slowly turning into a calculated hurricane designed to wipe me out completely. The true turning point happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was supposed to be at the cardiology clinic for a routine checkup, but the doctor had to cancel at the last minute due to a family emergency. I drove back to the house early, quietly unlocking the front door so I would not disturb anyone. As I took off my wet shoes in the foyer, I heard muffled voices coming from the kitchen. It was Jamal, Brittany, and a voice I immediately recognized as Todd. Todd was Brittany's older brother, a slick-talking white American who worked as a mortgage broker on the shady side of town. I had never liked Todd. He always wore cheap cologne, drove flashy leased cars, and looked at my home like it was a piece of meat. Something in his tone made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, so I crept silently down the hallway and pressed my back against the wall just outside the kitchen archway. I pulled my phone from my purse and pressed the record button. What I heard next made my blood run ice cold. They were not talking about Jamal's business. They were talking about stealing my house. Todd was explaining how easy it would be to forge a quitclaim deed to transfer the title of my property entirely into Jamal's name. Todd laughed a nasty, guttural sound, assuring them that he could push the fraudulent paperwork straight through the system using his shady connections at the county office. He told them nobody would question a son taking over the estate of his aging mother. Then Brittany chimed in, her voice dripping with pure venom. She said they could list the house the very next month, take the $1.2 million, and finally live the luxury lifestyle they deserved. When Jamal asked what they were going to do with me, the silence that followed felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Brittany coldly replied that they would just stick me in one of those low-income state-run nursing homes on the outskirts of the city. She said I was getting old and confused anyway, and that it was time for me to be out of their way for good. I stood in the shadows, my hand clamped firmly over my mouth to stifle the agonizing sob building in my chest. My own flesh and blood, the boy I had sacrificed my entire youth to protect and provide for, was sitting at my kitchen table, calmly plotting to leave me penniless and rot in a dilapidated facility. I listened to my son agree to the plan. He actually agreed. He said it made financial sense. I stopped the recording, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped the phone. The devastation threatened to pull me under, but as I stood there in the dark hallway, the crushing sorrow suddenly hardened into something else. It hardened into pure, blinding rage. I did not confront them right then and there. I quietly slipped back out the front door, got into my car and drove away, realizing that the son I raised was dead, and in his place was a greedy stranger I was about to destroy. Exactly 1 week later, they executed their wicked little plan. I was sitting in the living room folding laundry when Brittany pranced in her face, wearing a sickeningly sweet smile. She handed me a glossy brochure. I looked down and saw the cover. It was for a dismal, underfunded nursing home in a dangerous part of town. Brittany sat on the edge of the coffee table, and spoke to me in that condescending, babyish tone you use with a toddler. She told me that she and Jamal had been talking, and they decided that I needed professional care. She said the house was just too much for me to handle, and that I would be much happier around people my own age. I slowly set the brochure down on the folded towels, looking straight into her soulless eyes. I told her I was not going anywhere, and that she had absolutely no right to make decisions about my life or my home. That is when Jamal walked into the room holding a manila folder. His chest puffed out like he was the king of the castle. I stood up and finally let my anger show. I looked right at him and demanded to know about the quitclaim deed. I told them I knew exactly what they and Todd had done behind my back. The moment the words left my mouth, the fake sweet mask completely fell off Brittany's face. Her eyes narrowed with vicious hatred, and she went into a screaming rage. She yelled that I was a crazy, ungrateful old hag. Before I could even react, she stormed down the hallway to my small bedroom, grabbed my suitcases from the closet, and began wildly shoving my clothes into them. She dragged my bags through the living room, scratching the hardwood floors I had polished for years, and hurled them out the front door onto the concrete. I turned to Jamal, my heart shattering into a million pieces, praying for him to stop her. But Jamal just stood there, clutching that fraudulent folder. He looked at me with the cold, dead expression and delivered the final, devastating blow. He told me that I was not mentally fit anymore. He said that I was clearly hallucinating conspiracies and that he owned the house now. He told me it was for the best and that I needed to leave his property immediately. He grabbed my arm, shoved me out onto the porch, and slammed the door in my face. The heavy deadbolt clicked into place, locking me out of my own life. I stood on the porch, surrounded by my scattered belongings, as the cold reality washed over me. They had actually done it. They had thrown a 65-year-old woman out into the harsh elements with nothing but the clothes on her back. I could hear Brittany laughing through the thick wooden door, celebrating her perceived victory. The sting of the brisk October wind was nothing compared to the agony of my son's ultimate betrayal. They had stripped me of my dignity, my home and my safety, leaving me stranded and alone. But as I gathered my scattered clothes from the dirty concrete, my tears dried up. I refused to be the broken woman they desperately wanted me to be. I did not sit down on that dirty concrete curb and cry. I did not bang my fists against the heavy oak door and beg my own son for mercy. Instead, I stood up completely straight, brushed the dry Georgia dirt off my favorite slacks, and pulled out my smartphone. I calmly ordered an Uber, loaded my scratched suitcases into the trunk of the car, and gave the driver the address to my sister Vivian's house across town. I rode in absolute silence, watching the neighborhood I had loved for decades blur past the window, letting the initial shock harden into a fierce, unwavering resolve. Vivian has always been my rock, my fierce protector since we were little girls, singing together in the church choir. She is happily married to Robert, my brother-in-law, who is a sharp, no-nonsense white American man, and a retired, incredibly heavy-hitting estate and trust attorney. For over 30 years, Robert ruthlessly handled the most complex high-stakes legal battles for the wealthiest families in Atlanta. When I arrived at their beautiful home, Vivian took one single look at my exhausted face and my thrown-together bags and immediately pulled me into her warm, comforting arms. I sat down at their massive mahogany dining table, my hands trembling slightly as they wrapped around a hot mug of black coffee, and I spilled everything. I told them exactly how Jamal and Brittany threw me out into the cold wind like yesterday's trash. Then I placed my phone flat on the polished table, took a deep, shaky breath, and hit play on the audio recording I had secretly captured in my hallway. Robert sat perfectly still, his sharp blue eyes narrowing as he listened to Todd Brittany and my own son openly plotting to forge a quitclaim deed. I explained how Jamal smugly held up that manila folder, boldly claiming he now legally owned my $1.2 million estate, and was officially evicting me because I was somehow mentally unfit. I fully expected Robert to be outraged. I expected him to jump up from his chair immediately, call the local police chief, and march right over there to demand my house back. But Robert did not yell. He did not even look angry. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and a slow, cold, and incredibly knowing smile spread across his face. Robert began to laugh. It was not a warm, friendly chuckle. It was the dark, calculated laugh of a brilliant lawyer who had just watched his arrogant opponents walk blindly into a devastating, inescapable trap. He reached across the dining table, patted my shaking hand gently, and reminded me of the brilliant, ironclad legal move my late husband Richard and I had made exactly 12 years ago. Robert looked right into my eyes and explained the absolute reality of the situation. A reality that my incredibly greedy son and his foolish, manipulative wife completely failed to research before executing their wicked plan. Over a decade ago, when Richard's catering business was booming and we were planning for our retirement, Robert had strongly advised us to aggressively protect our family assets from any future liabilities or probate court issues. We did not just write a simple will and tuck it in a drawer. We went through a rigorous legal process and transferred the title of our beautiful $1.2 million brick home, along with all of our major financial investment accounts, directly into a bulletproof, irrevocable trust. The most important word in that entire legal document is irrevocable. That means the house was no longer legally tied to my personal name as an individual citizen. It could not be casually altered, sold, or transferred by me or anyone else without jumping through massive, complex legal hoops managed by the highly regulated designated trustee, which happened to be a major corporate bank downtown. Therefore, the forged quitclaim deed that Jamal and Todd so proudly filed at the local county clerk office was completely, unequivocally, and legally void from the very second it was printed. It was nothing more than a worthless piece of paper. You simply cannot transfer ownership of a property from Beatrice the individual because Beatrice the individual does not legally own the property. The trust owns it. Jamal did not own a single red brick, not a single blade of green grass, not even one drop of paint in that entire magnificent estate. But Robert was not finished blowing my mind. His cold smile widened as he leaned in and explained the true, magnificent beauty of their catastrophic mistake. By intentionally forging my signature on a legal property document and officially filing it with the county government, they had already committed a serious local felony. But it was about to get so much better. Todd had confidently assured them he could push the fraudulent paperwork through his shady mortgage connections to sell the house fast. If they successfully listed the house on the open market and attempted to sell a high-value property they did not legally own, especially if the large purchase funds were transferred electronically by a title company or wired across state lines by an out-of-state buyer, they would not just be committing local real estate fraud. They would be officially committing federal wire fraud and massive felony forgery. The federal government absolutely does not play around with wire fraud. It is a severe crime that carries mandatory lengthy prison time. My arrogant son and his wicked wife genuinely thought they were cleverly stealing my hard-earned life savings and kicking me to the curb. But in reality, they were painstakingly building their own federal prison cell, brick by brick. They had willingly handed us the absolute perfect weapon to destroy them completely, and they had absolutely no idea that the very ground they were standing on was about to completely collapse underneath their feet. My very first instinct was to pick up my phone and call the local police department right then and there. I wanted to see the sheer terror on Brittany's face when the flashing lights of the squad cars rolled up to my beautiful brick house. But Robert raised his hand, shook his head, and firmly told me to stop. He strongly advised me to stay completely silent, keep my head down, and do absolutely nothing to alert them. He carefully explained that if we stopped them right now, they would simply hire a slimy defense lawyer, claim the forged deed was just a silly misunderstanding or a careless clerical error, and they might easily walk away with nothing more than a gentle slap on the wrist. To ensure they faced the absolute maximum legal consequences for their profound, unforgivable betrayal, we had to let them completely finish digging their own massive grave. Robert explicitly instructed me to let them boldly list the house on the open real estate market. Let them stage the rooms and host the busy open houses. Let them find a willing, unsuspecting buyer and greedily negotiate a final sale price. Let them sit down at the large mahogany table at the local title company and confidently sign all of those legally binding closing documents. The very exact moment they put their forged signatures on those final federal papers and officially attempted to accept the buyer's large wire transfer of money, the massive crime would be fully undeniably complete, and there would be absolutely no escaping the severe life-ruining consequences. So I took his brilliant strategic advice to heart. For the entire next 4 weeks, I did not shed a single tear over my treacherous son. Instead, I spent my days living incredibly comfortably in Vivian's luxurious, quiet guest suite. I slept in late every single morning, thoroughly enjoying the deep peace and quiet without Brittany's nasty, passive-aggressive comments ruining my day. Vivian and I spent our long afternoons sitting out on her sunny, beautifully landscaped back patio, sipping tall glasses of cold, iced sweet tea, laughing out loud, and reminiscing about our happy childhood. She even treated me to full relaxing days at a high-end luxury day spa, where I received deep tissue massages and incredibly expensive facials to completely wash away the heavy stress of the past year. But my absolute favorite daily activity was opening my laptop computer, sitting back in a plush armchair, and happily watching Jamal's active real estate listing online. I watched with deep, quiet satisfaction as they aggressively dropped the asking price twice, clearly desperate to get their greedy hands on the cash as quickly as humanly possible. I watched the glossy virtual tour they proudly posted, noting how they had completely erased my physical presence from the beloved home I built with my own hands. I carefully monitored every single website update, every pending offer, and every minor status change on the real estate platform, as the heavy steel jaws of our carefully laid legal trap got closer and closer to permanently snapping shut. They were foolishly celebrating their impending massive payday, happily picking out expensive luxury cars and planning lavish vacations, while I sat quietly in the shadows, holding the absolute remote control to their total, unavoidable destruction. The crisp Tuesday morning finally arrived, bringing with it the sweet, undeniable scent of absolute justice. I had waited patiently for this exact moment. Inside the sleek, glass-walled conference room of the premier downtown Atlanta title company, Jamal, Brittany, and Todd were sitting around a massive granite table, grinning from ear to ear. They were practically salivating, completely intoxicated by their own greed. The naive, unsuspecting buyers were sitting right across from them, drinking expensive complimentary coffee pens in hand, ready to finalize the massive transaction. The final closing documents were neatly stacked in front of my son, and they were mere seconds away from receiving a massive electronic wire transfer for $1.2 million. Todd was leaning back in his expensive leather chair, checking his flashy gold watch, while Brittany was eagerly adjusting her brand-new designer sunglasses on top of her head, likely dreaming about her next luxury vacation. They thought they had pulled off the perfect crime. They thought they were rich and that I was rotting away somewhere in a state-run facility. But right as Jamal reached for the heavy silver pen to sign away the very last piece of my legacy, the heavy glass doors of the conference room swung wide open. I walked in with my head held high, my posture perfectly straight, wearing my absolute best tailored Sunday suit and a beautiful wide-brimmed church hat. I was flanked on my right side by my brilliant brother-in-law Robert, holding a thick leather briefcase, and on my left, by two very serious, uniformed local police detectives. The loud chatter in the room instantly died, replaced by a suffocating silence. The look of smug, arrogant victory drained completely from Brittany's face, replaced immediately by the pale, chalky colour of sheer, unadulterated panic. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably. Jamal dropped the silver pen, his mouth falling wide open as he tried desperately to play it off. He nervously cleared his throat and stammered awkwardly, trying to introduce me to the confused buyers as his poor confused mother, who had somehow wandered into the wrong building. But Robert did not give him a single second to spin a pathetic lie. Robert walked straight up to the granite table, slammed his heavy briefcase down with a loud crack, and pulled out the original, legally certified, irrevocable trust documents. He looked directly at the shocked title agent and loudly declared that the real estate sale must be halted immediately. Robert pointed a firm finger at Todd and Jamal, meticulously explaining to the entire room that the quitclaim deed they had filed was a complete, fraudulent forgery. He revealed that the property was strictly owned by a corporate trust, that I was the sole beneficiary, and that neither my son nor his shady brother-in-law had any legal right to sell a single blade of grass on that estate. Robert loudly clarified that by attempting to execute this sale across state lines with a forged document, they had just committed federal wire fraud right in front of witnesses. The title agent gasped and snatched her paperwork back, staring at Jamal in absolute horror. The trap had officially snapped shut. The older couple, who had intended to buy my home, immediately jumped out of their leather chairs. The husband angrily grabbed his wife's hand, shouted that they were cancelling the entire deal to avoid being tied to a federal crime, and stormed right out of the glass conference room. Without the buyers, the illusion was completely shattered. The lead police detective stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing loudly on the polished hardwood floor, and calmly instructed Jamal, Brittany, and Todd to place their hands behind their backs. He loudly read them their Miranda rights, officially arresting all three of them right there on the spot for severe felony forgery and attempted real estate wire fraud. The absolute public humiliation that followed was a truly beautiful sight to behold. Brittany, who had strutted around my house like an untouchable queen, completely lost her mind. She started thrashing and screaming wildly as the cold steel handcuffs clicked tightly around her wrists, severely wrinkling her expensive designer silk dress. She desperately begged the officers to let her go, aggressively blaming the entire criminal scheme on her older brother and my son. Todd was sweating profusely, his slick, arrogant demeanor entirely gone, as he was roughly patted down and shoved toward the exit. But the absolute most pathetic sight in the room was Jamal. The arrogant, entitled boy who had physically pushed me out into the freezing October cold was now reduced to a blubbering, terrified child. As the second police detective locked the heavy handcuffs on his wrists, Jamal's knees buckled beneath him. He looked at me with thick tears streaming down his face and actually started begging. He cried out loudly in front of the entire office, pleading for his mommy to fix it, begging me to tell the police it was all just a big family misunderstanding. I walked slowly around the large granite table and stood inches away from his trembling face. I looked him dead in his tear-filled eyes, feeling no pity, no sorrow, only the cold, firm satisfaction of righteous justice. I spoke in a low, unwavering voice so the entire quiet room could hear me perfectly. I told him that I am only a special person when it is convenient for him. I told him that today I am not his mummy. Today I am just the landlord he tried to rob. I turned my back on him without shedding a single tear and proudly walked out of the building, listening to his pathetic wails echo through the lobby as the officers dragged them away to the waiting patrol cars. 6 months later, the heavy dust had finally settled, and the harsh reality of their actions had completely ruined their lives. Todd was permanently stripped of his mortgage brokerage license and was facing severe federal prison time for his role in orchestrating the massive fraud. Jamal and Brittany were entirely broken. Their bank accounts were completely drained by expensive criminal defense lawyers. They were forced to move into a tiny, cramped, and incredibly filthy studio apartment on the bad side of town, drowning in massive legal debt while nervously awaiting their upcoming felony trial. They had absolutely nothing left, not even their pride. As for me, my life blossomed into something truly beautiful. Once the criminal investigation cleared the title of my property, I legally sold my gorgeous brick estate for a massive profit. I took my millions of dollars in cash and bought a stunning, sun-drenched beachfront condo down in southern Florida. Every single morning, I wake up to the gentle sound of the ocean waves crashing against the warm, white sand. I sip my hot coffee on my private balcony, feeling the warm, tropical breeze against my face, totally free from the heavy burdens of my past. I am living my absolute best, most peaceful life. I am constantly surrounded by my loving sister Vivian, my brilliant brother-in-law Robert, and a wonderful community of new friends who actually love and respect me for who I am, not for what they can steal from my bank account. I found my true happiness, and I proved that a mother's love might be unconditional. But her financial support, her beautiful home, and her peaceful presence are precious privileges that can be rightfully and permanently revoked the very moment you cross the line. Ladies, we give our children roots, but we should not let them use those roots to strangle us. A mother's love is unconditional, but access to my peace and my bank account is a privilege, not a right. We spend our entire lives pouring every ounce of our energy, our hard-earned money, and our deeply devoted souls into raising our babies. We want them to soar higher than we ever did and experience a life completely free from the heavy struggles we endured. But you must remember to protect yourself first. Never let anyone, not even your own flesh and blood, disrespect the sacred ground you stand on, or make you feel small in the beautiful castle you built with your own 2 hands. You are a queen, and you deserve to wear your crown in absolute peace every single day of your life. If this story resonated with you, do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more truths. I want to hear from you. Head down to the comments and tell me where you are watching, from what time it is, and what you would have done if you were in my shoes. Would you have called the police immediately, or would you have set the exact same legal trap I did? I read every single comment, and I truly love connecting with all of you strong, beautiful women across the country. Share this video with a friend or a family member who might need a powerful reminder of her own incredible worth today. Keep your head held high, never settle for disrespect, and always know your legal rights. Until next time, stay blessed and protect your peace.